Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. Today, I'm doing something new. I'm going to do what I'm going to call Reviewer's Log Supplemental. And it's something I'm doing after having been inspired to take up this practice of adding amendments to my review videos after the initial video has been made and uploaded by a YouTuber called
UK Danger Man,
who makes what he calls addendum videos to his review videos. I think it's a cool way to talk about the stuff about an episode that you forgot to talk about when you did the initial review before the next episode comes out, so that you don't have to try to work it in to that review by saying something, oh yeah, before we get to the new one, let me talk about the old one because I forgot some stuff. So I think it's a cool practice. And I'm going to be a huge copycat and do likewise. But I'm going to just call them Reviewer's Log Supplemental, me being the reviewer. And my first one of these videos is going to be about the series premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds and a little bit of wrap-up of some things that happened at the end of season 2 of Picard. So since the first episode of Strange New Worlds aired, I've watched it a second time because my wife hadn't seen it when I saw it, and so I wanted her to see it, and so I watched it with her. And between that and some conversations I've been having in the comments section, not only on my channel with other YouTubers that have commented there, namely iLens, Wedding Videography, Who Cares Really, and Michael Strathmore, as well as people who've commented on other YouTubers' videos, a bunch of things have come to mind that I thought should be discussed. So let me get right to that. If you've been following the channel, you know that a couple of weeks ago, before the premiere of Strange New Worlds, I made a video about how they had cast a black actor to play Robert April, even though he was depicted as white in the animated series, and we had a conversation about whether or not that's canon and whether or not it's a canon change, and they have yet to update the character database on StarTrek.com. It still shows the white version of the character from the cartoon as the profile picture, and that's fine, but you know, the discussions that people have been having about that bring up the broader issue of, is canon a thing? And if it is a thing, where do you draw the line? Because people keep saying he appeared in one episode of the cartoon. Even the great Sean Farrick at Trek Culture sort of blew it off as, oh, he just appeared once in the cartoon. So, you know, I think a big conversation needs to be had about canon, because, you know, as far as I know, the fact that Captain Kirk served on the Farragut before he served on the Enterprise was only mentioned in one episode of the original series. Is that not canon? Because it was only mentioned once? And there are now 2 animated Star Trek shows on Paramount Plus, so are they not canon because they're cartoons? I don't think that's how they're treating it. So between the 2 things, the fact that it's a cartoon and the fact that that particular character's appearance was only mentioned once, and it's still canon, people. And I don't think that can be denied. Otherwise, we're going to start throwing out all kinds of factoids about Star Trek that were only mentioned once. It's ridiculous. Now,
let's talk about another casting choice. They decided to cast, for Strange New Worlds, an actor to play the character of Mr. Kyle, who would appear to be of Asian origin, when the original character, Mr. Kyle, was a Caucasian person, likely of UK descent, with a name like Kyle. And it's like, what? Why? Why did they do that? Just to add one more diverse character? I mean, I'm all for a diverse cast, and I think modern shows have to have diverse casts so that shows look like real life, but I don't see why they have to change existing characters within universe, which is the issue with Robert April. When you do an Annie reboot and you go with an all-black cast, when the original Annie was an all-white cast, that's fine. It's a separate universe from the other Annies where everybody was white. It's its own thing. It stands alone. This is not that. This is an in-universe change to a character that in the same universe is not Asian. So, and this isn't a one-episode thing. The character appeared in more than one episode of the original series, if I'm not mistaken. So why do they make these changes? Anyway, moving along.
What I mentioned in my review of the first episode of Strange New Worlds is that I have been both excited for this show and dreading it simultaneously since the idea of it first surfaced. Because I think it's going to be great to see stories about what happened on the Enterprise in that era under Captain Pike, when Spock was not the first officer, when, he was a little bit undercooked, as it were. And, stories that involve number one, who we only saw in one episode, and I think is an intriguing character. But dreading it because I knew that as soon as they went in front of cameras, they were going to start screwing up canon left and right. And people say, well, how can they do that? We don't know anything about that era. No, I know that. We don't know anything about that era specifically in terms of things that occurred, but we do know things about the trappings of that era. And I mentioned in my review of the premiere that they used the transporter to beam a solution, a liquid solution, into Spock's eyeball by placing a vial of it on the transporter pad and beaming it down. Now, that's ridiculous. And because you could never target somebody's eyeball, right? It's ridiculous. That's certainly not in that era. And at the time, I wondered, well, where did the vial go? When they transported it, what happened to the molecules, the atoms that made up the vial? Because the transporter reconstructs everything. So where did it put the vial, basically? And then I was thinking, well, the transporter does screen pathogens out, or at least it did by the time of the next gen. So it does get some matter that it doesn't reconstitute when beaming something up, or maybe even down. So I guess you could explain it that way. But then one of the commenters, whom I mentioned, pointed out that the vial did not beam down, that only the liquid beamed down. And I hadn't noticed that. So I went back and watched that part, and he's correct. The liquid got beamed down, but the vial remained. Okay, so that takes care of what happened to the vial. But here's the thing. First of all, if you've got a transporter that's reconstituting people based on a pattern that it takes of them, and if in this case you're even programming it with clothing patterns to put on the people as they beam down, I guess the question at that point is what happens to I guess they reorganize their uniforms into that. Anyway, why would you not just put the information of what makes up the solution into the computer so the transporter could just synthesize it in the transport beam? Why would you have to put a vial of this stuff on the transport pad? Supposing you still have to do that, how did the transporter beam target the liquid inside the vial and not the vial? I mean, come on. In the original series era, they weren't even doing stuff like that in the next gen era. It's absurd. The transporter was never meant to be that sophisticated. It was meant to transport bulk objects and people whole, not in such a way that you could put a lunchbox on there and only beam down the thermos from inside it. That's not what it's for. That's not how it works. If somebody on the planet needed a sprocket beamed down and you had a sprocket inside of a whoozamajigger, you would have to take it out of the whoozamajigger and beam it down. You couldn't just put the whoozamajigger on the transport pad and tell the transporter to target the sprocket inside the whoozamajigger and beam it down. That's not how transporters work. So a lot of you right now are sitting there going, why do you care? Why do you care about that? It's so dumb to focus on. And my response to that is, no, it's not. Because there have to be rules or it gets to be ridiculous, or there are never any limitations. They can just do whatever they think of, whether it's consistent with what came before or not, and it makes the entire endeavor a joke. And it's not that complicated to have someone on the writing staff or on, who sits in the room and goes, no, you can't do that, because they remember Star Trek. Or who goes, I'm not sure about that, let me look it up. But none of these people do that. None of these people know Star Trek well enough to even look things up, apparently, or they don't care. And so they're just doing whatever the hell they want. And, it's to the point where they're doing it so often that I'm not catching everything because there's so much of it. Like a bunch of weeks or possibly a couple of months ago, I did a video about one of the early episodes of season 4 of Discovery where Tilly went from Earth to Vulcan and back in the blink of an eye, which Spock does in this episode. Pike's in Montana. He calls Spock on Vulcan and says, meet me on the Enterprise, we gotta go get number 1. And Spock beats Pike to the Enterprise from Vulcan.
And I didn't even notice it.
But it takes a certain amount of time to go to Vulcan, especially in this era, where we know it's not, for example, 1,000 years later and there might be faster ships. No. We know how long it takes to go from Earth to Vulcan in this era. And if you don't know how long it takes, I'm going to let Mr. Scott remind you.
We can have you back on Vulcan in 4 days, Mr. Spock. 4 days, Mr. Spock.
4 days?
Mr. Spock.
So it takes 4 days. It takes 4 days to get from Earth to Vulcan and from Vulcan to Earth. Unless the Vulcans have a really, really, really fast ship in that era, or had one, I should say, in that era, that they didn't tell anybody about. 4 days. And we know they didn't wait 4 days because the whole point of April going to get Pike was to get him to take the ship out a week early. So we know he wasn't sitting around for 4 days going, all right, Spock's there now because it's been 4 days, I can go up. 4 days, that's like a big deal. And again, people must be like, well, why do you care? Who cares? Because it's indicative of the fact that they don't care. They don't care about the property. They don't care about us. And it's like the 3rd time they've done it. They did it at the end of Discovery season 1. Sarek walks onto the bridge of the Discovery as they're heading to Vulcan, and he takes up a spot in a standing position on the bridge, and he says, thank you, Captain, for allowing me to come up to the bridge for the journey to Vulcan from Earth. It's a 4-day journey. So the idea that he would come up and stand there for the journey like it's a 45-minute ride is no. So they obviously don't know that it takes 4 days to go to Vulcan. And don't forget, at the time, Discovery wasn't using the jump drive anymore. They had, they started using it again in season 2, but they had put the kibosh on it at that point. They weren't jumping there. They were going by traditional warp. Or there wouldn't have been a journey. You wouldn't have gone up to the bridge for the jump. They were going there under traditional warp. So it's the 3rd time they've done it. And it's just an indication that they don't care. And, somebody even said that to me, who said, why do you just forget about that? Just watch the show and enjoy it. Don't focus on that stuff. The writers have even said, or the producers have even said, they're not going to be held prisoner or held hostage by canon. And I can understand it to a certain point. If there's a story you want to tell and a crucial part of your story would be, in conflict with some little point of canon, but the story is really good, by all means, fudge the canon and tell the story. But there was nothing about this episode that required them to have Spock on Vulcan, they did not have to do that. They could have done that part later. They could have said it was a flashback. They didn't have to have it, they could have said 4 days ago on Vulcan, but they didn't. They made it in the present, and Pike calls him and says, get to the Enterprise. So it's like, that's not a situation where the story came first and they put aside canon for the story. No, they put it aside because they're stupid. They're lazy and they don't know what they're doing. And, there's a bunch of other stuff. As an example, let's talk about the whole Vulcan romance thing. Now, it's never been said that in canon that Vulcans don't engage in romantic activity outside of the Pon-farr period of their lives. So it's not an established fact that, for example, Spock would never engage in romantic activity outside of a Pon-farr period. For that matter, we don't know that he wasn't experiencing that, although generally, as we've seen on both Voyager and the original series, Vulcans get a little crazy, and he wasn't at all crazy, and he was able to leave, so I don't think he was going through it. But anyway, there's nothing in the canon that says that they're not sexual creatures outside of Pon-farr, which would mean that Pon-farr is just there so that, it ensures that they will engage in sexual activity at some point for the propagation of the species. So that's fine. But I still question why they're doing it. Why are they doing it? They did it in the J.J. Abrams movies. Like, why are you doing it? Why? And there's going to be more of it in this season, and I don't like it. Is it really a canon violation? No, but it's flirting with it, and it's unnecessary. I mean, it's for the story. We want to tell this story. Well, why? Why? Why do you have to tell this story about Spock having a dating life? Like, what? I want to move away from canon and just talk about some dumb stuff that was in the episode. I guess you could put this last thing in that category, so maybe we already moved away from canon. But anyway, speaking of Spock, why was he even sent on the mission? He never should have even been sent on the mission under the conditions of, the use of an experimental appearance-altering thing that they didn't know was going to work, let alone work with him, which they knew was going to be problematic. And, as soon as he started showing signs, Pike should have sent him back up to the surface to be beamed out and beamed up and off the mission. But of course they couldn't do that because they needed an excuse for the aliens to figure out that they weren't from there. And that's why I keep saying they write these shows backwards. Like, okay, we need a reason that the indigenous people recognize that these are the aliens. We need them to get caught. I know. Let's make it so that Spock, let's first of all make it so the disguises are not surgical, they're internal. And then we'll make it so, even though that's never been done before and it's not a thing and it's completely different from what they were doing in that era and the later eras. And then we'll make it so that it wears off and that the captain doesn't send him out of there, rather than coming up with something else. It's just lazy. And it doesn't make sense. And why am I being treated like a person who can't recognize when something doesn't make sense? Why are they treating me as an audience member like someone who's just going to overlook it? Or that it won't register? I mean, it didn't the first time, I guess. I mean, I shouldn't say it didn't. It kind of did, but there's so much other dumb stuff going on that I can only take so much of it down. Because that was only moments after the eye thing. And then, then they had the thing where the guy runs from sickbay, right? Why wasn't he strapped down? Forget that. Let's say they don't do that. Why isn't sickbay secure? Why aren't there security guards in there? Why? Because they needed to add a chase or some kind of excitement to the episode, so they wrote this stupid sequence. It literally goes nowhere and has nothing to do with the story. It's just there for something to do. And let's talk about how they solve it. They solve it by having Nurse Chapel run all the way back from a turbo lift to the sick bay to use the emergency sick bay transporter, which didn't exist, to beam from one part of the ship to the other part of the ship, which wasn't done in that era or even later during the original series era. And not only that, but she knew what turbo lift he was in. She knew where it was going. Why not have the bridge stop the turbo lift? and send security to wherever they stopped it? Why not have security on the bridge? Maybe there's only the one turbo lift, I don't know. But like, they couldn't have alerted the bridge that someone was going to come out of the, so they could at least have grabbed him. I mean, not that he's going to go anywhere on the bridge. Where's he going to go? But like, really? She beamed from one part of the ship to another to stop him when he got off the turbo lift, even though she knew where it was going and could have stopped. Like, so that's just stupid. That's not what someone in a building on Earth in 2022 would do, assuming you could control the elevator from outside, which in modern buildings, I wouldn't be surprised if you can. They have brakes. They can be accessed remotely, I'm guessing, in modern facilities. So why did she do it that way? It's because the writers are just, they don't care about what makes sense. And, you know, believe me, I'm going somewhere with this, but let's skip over now to the ending of Star Trek Picard, the last couple of episodes. Some stuff happens. And one of those things is that Dr. Sung ends up pulling a file from his desk that says Project Khan. And originally I said, oh, they're trying to say that this is a project of his that he had stopped working on, but now I guess he's going to continue working on it and he's going to be the one that develops Khan. But then I said, didn't Khan leave the Earth in the mid-90s? So that's a continuity error. But actually, I don't think that's what happened. So I want to correct the record. What he does is he pulls this file out that is just a file about the project from the 90s, because it has dates on there from the 90s. So I guess what the implication of that is that he's going to look back on the project that created Khan for ideas or information that he's going to use in whatever he does next. So I just wanted to correct the record on that thing. And then I want to ask a question about dumb stuff that happened in these episodes that I didn't bring up, that other people pointed out to me. In the episode, Talon dies on the rocket, at the rocket base. She's Romulan. What did they do with her body so that it wouldn't be discovered by the people of 2024? You know, an alien body in the past, you know? What did they do with it? They don't tell you. We don't know. What did they do with it? Shouldn't that be something they should tell us? What about all the Borgified soldiers that were beamed into the walls of the chateau? How are they going to explain that later? What if the nanoprobes, assuming they were rendered unusable once the bodies fuse with the wall, but might someone discover them when they find these bodies? Like what? Someone's going to find those bodies at some point. What about all the Borgified soldiers that they shot in the woods? What did they do with all those bodies? Nobody says. Now, did Q fix it? Did Q take care of that stuff when he, snapped his fingers at the end? They don't say. We can assume that. But I really think that's the kind of thing they should be telling the audience and not leaving hanging. And, that's kind of the final thing I wanted to mention that I wanted to say more about or bring up that I forgot to bring up or didn't catch that other people caught. And again, people will say, why do you care about these things? And I've been saying, because because it's important to me and I'm an audience member and I don't want to be treated like an idiot, but it's more than that. If Star Trek, Strange New Worlds and Picard and all of this, the new shows were being broadcast on TV for free, like in the past, I don't think I would take as much umbrage at these things as I do. But in the end, I'm paying them a monthly fee to watch this stuff. They are selling it directly to me in the form of a subscription service, just like someone who makes luggage would sell me luggage directly. Just like someone who makes cereal would sell cereal to me directly. And if the luggage or the cereal isn't right, I'm going to have something to say about it because I'm the customer and I'm the boss and I pay the bills. And it's the same thing with Paramount Plus. No, I'm not going to just be quiet and sit there and consume it and let it be and not say anything. I'm going to hold their feet to the fire because I'm paying to watch these episodes directly. And I'm watching ads. I mean, I understand I have the option not to for more money, but I'm also watching ads. In the old days, you didn't pay to watch Star Trek. You just had to deal with the commercials. You paid for it, quote unquote, by buying some of the products that you saw in ads, not only on Star Trek, but whatever other shows that you watched, because then those companies spent some of their money buying the ads from the people who make the shows. So now I'm still doing that. So I'm paying for it that way, but I'm also paying for it directly. And you might say, well, just stop. But I don't want no Star Trek. I want good Star Trek and correct Star Trek. And I'm paying for it directly. And when it's not as good as it could be, I'm going to speak up. And I'm going to hold their feet to the fire. And that's all there is to it. So you'll be seeing more nitpicky stuff like this from me. Because they're going to keep screwing up, which I knew they would when I first heard that they might be making the show, and then when I heard they were in fact making it. So that's just the way it is. That's all I wanted to say in this supplemental video. I want to thank everybody who's been watching my videos lately. The channel has been growing and getting more engagement, and I'm pleased as punch about that. I'm very much enjoying talking with everyone, even the people that I don't 100% agree with. I think communication is important, just among humans in general. And so I am a person who relishes communicating with others. And it makes it, in this case, so that I'm not just talking to myself when I do these videos, and that's important to me. So I thank those of you who've been watching, those of you who've been commenting. Keep it coming, and I will see you next time. For now, I take my leave, and as always, I say peace and long life.